In this episode, we're going to explore materials and textures. I have a basic lighting design here of 4 objects on stage, 2 boxes and 2 cylinders. We're going to apply some materials and textures to them, and we will start with exploring the materials available in the Library tab under Materials. Here you can find some basic materials that you can use to apply to objects as well as customize for your own needs. I'm going to apply a textured iron material to the first cylinder and a transparent plexiglass to the second cylinder. When you have applied materials to objects, then all materials used in your project are always present in the Design tab under the Materials folder. So here you can see the textured iron and plexiglass materials that I've applied to these cylinders. This also gives us an opportunity to customize them and manipulate them. So let's start by looking on the textured iron material and its properties. To begin with, each material has a color property that defines the base color of the material. In addition to this, we can apply an image, a texture generator, or a media. In this case, there's a grain image applied to the material to give it a more structural feel. Following the texture properties, the first one is the smoothness property. This defines more or less the shininess of the material. If set to 0, the material is fully matte, and if set to 100%, it is fully reflective. So normally you will not be using 0 or 100%, but values in between. In this case, it was set to 55%. The metallic property defines whether the material is a metal or not. This affects the way lighting is reflected from the surface and whether it keeps the hue or not. This is normally set either to 0 or 100%, so if you're working with a metal, set it to 100, if not, leave it at 0. The luminance property can be used to create surfaces that emit lighting, such as screens, or if you want to fake an internally lit object. The transparency setting, of course, controls whether you can see through the material or not, as we can in the plexiglass case here. So let's switch to the plexiglass material. This has a transparency set to 90%, and it also has a tint setting of 100%. The tint controls what colors look like through the object. And there's a simple rule here. If the material is a plastic or a glass or a liquid, then looking through it will actually color whatever is behind. And this is the case here, and why the tint setting is set to 100%. So if I change the material to green, all the objects behind it will appear more or less green. If, on the other hand, you are working with a gauze or a thin weave of some kind that isn't actually transparent for any other reason than the fact that it has tiny holes in it, then you would normally leave the tint at 0%. This means that you will see the scene as is through the material and have the light on the material added to it. So in this case, we are getting some green light from the surface of the cylinder while seeing other lighting from behind it. Finally, we have the frost property, which controls the level of frosting on a transparent surface. So if I give this a value, you can see how objects behind it become fuzzier. So now we have in fact customized some materials from the library, and this is a good starting point if you wish to create new materials, to use a material from the library and then shape it to your needs. Of course, you can also create your own materials from scratch, so let's try that as well. The way you would do that is by right-clicking on the Materials folder and choosing Add New Material. You can give it a name if you wish, and in this case I'm going to call it King, because I intend to apply a specific texture to it. The image I have in mind, the image I have in mind is the picture of a playing card, the king. When you apply a texture image, it is normally a good idea to set the color to white because the color of the material combines with the colors of the image. So now let's apply this material to see what we have to play with. And I'm going to drag and drop it onto the first box. So you can immediately see the texture applied to the surface of the box. And you can also see how it repeats and wraps around the box. However, you can also see that it's lost its proportions, and the reason for that is that the texture width and height settings come into play here. In this case, it would probably have been more reasonable to have a texture width of something around 80 centimeters. You can adjust these settings to have the texture match the intended size of the material. But there's also another way to go about this, and that is to manually map the material onto the cube. Before I do that, I will reset this though, as it can become confusing otherwise. I select the box in one of the views, and in this case I will map the texture onto the front of the cube, so I will also switch my view to a front mode. In order to access this functionality, click the cogwheel and choose Map Material. You can now see that we have control over the placement of the texture and how that appears in the live view as I manipulate it. I can scale the texture as well as rotate it according to my needs. As you can see, it's now no longer repeating around the edges of the cube, but rather technically speaking, it's a planar projection, which is a terminology you might find in other modeling software, that we are controlling through the material mapping function. Another feature I would like to show you related to material mapping is what happens if you map the material of several objects at the same time. So I will apply our king to the next box as well, select both of them, start the material mapping, and as you can see, each of the box has its own mapping of the material, but I can unify this by choosing the Map to Extents action. The texture is then automatically stretched to fit the selected objects. So this is a very good method for applying a texture or even a photo onto a group of objects. So you might have built a stage scenery that you would like to apply a texture to, and although it comprises of several pieces, by using Map to Extents, the texture will be applied to all of them as a whole. If I now proceed to move one of the boxes, you can see how it preserves its mapping as well. At this point, it may be that you made a mistake and would like to go back again to the wrapping mapping of the material. And the way to do that is to select the box, go to its properties, where we have the material property of the box, which as you can see is using the king material and manual mapping. By double-clicking on the material property, I could switch it back to automatic mapping, as well as completely remove the material using the remove option. That's it for this time. Thank you, and follow our next episode.